Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and we're getting an update today from Vox Royalty, traded on the TSX under the ticker VOXR, and on the NASDAQ under the same ticker, VOXR. We're joined today with the CEO and chairman of Vox Royalty, Kyle Floyd. And Kyle, it's been a couple months since we've had an update on Vox, and you've actually had a lot of news out, but first and foremost, you've put out a really solid Q2 2024 financial results, and I'd like to dive in under the hood and just have you share with investors some of the key takeaways for Vox Royalty as far as how things are developing, how's the balance sheet going, how are the revenues going, and just give us a nice holistic look at the financial snapshot of Vox Royalty.
Terrific. And Chad, as always, thanks for having us back on the program. We always appreciate being with you. Well, yeah, so we announced our quarter, very pleased with the results. I think they continue to showcase the consistency of our business and how we've gone about building Vox Royalty Corp and our portfolio to really be an engine and a company that investors can trust over the long term. So we've been able to focus on increasing the revenue profile of the business at the same time that we've also been lowering the cost profile of the business. And I think that, both of those factors have to be considered in conjunction. One of the issues that's plaguing, let's call it the small cap royalty industry, is there is sometimes some revenue growth, but it's matched with cost increases that kind of erode that operating leverage. And so it's something that as a management team, as a board, also imparted by our shareholders, we've been really focused on ramping the operating leverage within the firm. And I'm pleased to say that, we're on track and, we lowered costs significantly. G&A was down 28% from what it had been in the comparable quarter. And, I don't know that we can maintain that kind of cost decrease trajectory, but we're very focused on the operating leverage within the firm. And I firmly believe that we're on the right track to continue to showcase that for our investors and create the ultimate value that we believe is intrinsically within the business.
Well, and Kyle, one of the ways you guys do that at Vox is by not overpaying for the royalties. And instead of getting in a big bidding war with a lot of other royalty companies to try to buy a prized asset and then ending up overpaying, you guys scout out particular transactions that are being overlooked by the market. Maybe to speak to people listening in that aren't familiar with your business model and what distinguishes you from the way you source deals.
Yeah, first and foremost, it comes down to our people, our systems, our practices. And, we've been at this now for over 10 years. And I think from the outset of the creation of Vox, it was always a very investor-focused approach of how are we going to actually create fundamental value? And the way that we do that is that, we have a great team and it's a technical team on the front lines of our business. The second thing is that that team is looking at information the rest of the world is not paying attention to. And then lastly, we bought and have built the world's largest database of third-party mining royalties. And so it starts with our team looking at the right information and then having the, let's call it the treasure map, so to speak, of where to find royalties that most of the world's unaware of, we're not paying attention to, allowing us to find interesting opportunities to unlock value for these royalty holders and ultimately transact it at fair prices and good prices for a royalty business such as us.
Well, and if we dive into the balance sheet just a little bit more here, it looks like year over year, if you look at Q2, you had a nice bump, but maybe the 6 months on a couple metrics, kind of a sideways move. You had indicated to the marketplace that would be more of a stair step year for you, where there wasn't going to be massive growth, but maybe speak to how things look as we move into 2025 and 2026, that there's kind of these years based on the way the assets go where things kind of trend sideways, and then there's years where there's growth. Maybe break that down for people.
Yeah, look, this year we've given guidance for between 11 to $13 million. By extension, our last quarter kind of reaffirmed that guidance. We're tracking well. We're tracking right in line with expectations. The developments over, call it the last quarter or so, some of these assets that are coming online have exceeded our expectations to a certain extent. But yeah, look, we're not back solving for a perfectly linear equation. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And what we've been focused on is finding value within royalty purchases. That's it is exclusively our business model. And so we're willing to have kind of a stair step year. We'll see, with some of these new assets coming online, we're optimistic about what that means to the business and the financials. But ultimately, one, we want to be transparent with the market. Two, we're patient around how we find value and how we build the business as well. So, you'll continue to see that our ultimate goal is to continue to increase the intrinsic value of the business and then ultimately also have that reflected in the share price. And, I think we're a ways off of having the present intrinsic value in the business reflected in the share price. But, we believe we'll get there with continued execution and the continued devotion of management to that cause. We're optimistic around that.
Well, and you mentioned some of the assets coming down the development pipeline, some of them moving a little faster. You did put out news at the end of last month on the 31st of July, and we'll put a link to the news section of the company right below this interview so people listening can follow along. But there was some information, and we've talked about this asset before, the Black Cat Syndicate, which some North American investors may not recognize, but they have actually moved into production. They're an Aussie producer, and you have a lot of Australian assets, but this is one that's maybe moving ahead of schedule on their Myrie gold deposit. Maybe break down the progress they're making on moving into production.
Yeah, and this royalty that we have over Black Cat's Cal East or Myrie Gold Deposit is really emblematic of how we built the portfolio, where we found the vast preponderance of our royalty portfolio for listeners that aren't that familiar with Vox. We are the second largest holder of hard rock mining royalties in Australia, and most of those are in Western Australia, which we consider to be the best mining jurisdiction in the world to hold royalties. And one of the reasons is that we can find great assets that are really unlocked in terms of their value, or maybe the market wouldn't expect it, and ultimately we're able to find those opacities where we can find unique value. This really is emblematic of how we go about building our business and why. And so this was actually a royalty bought from an automotive parts business at good and fair value, and ultimately an asset that we believe could come in production over the next 4 years. And sure enough, it has now. And we have ultimately bought this royalty at a fraction of its projected NAV that's now being crystallized as it comes into production. And it was really unlocked based on the jurisdictional strength of Australia. It's got great infrastructure, hungry mills, great mining contractors and operators, and a gold price in AUD terms that's been just at all-time highs and growing consistently for the last 4.5 years. So it is really representative of our portfolio and what's transpiring. Chad, last time we were on, we talked about how strong Western Australia is and the dynamics at play in that market, and the fact that we have a leading position in terms of relative exposure to it. And this is just another example of what that exposure means, is that we're buying a royalty at really a fraction of the cash flow that it's going to contribute. And we'll see this royalty, I think it has more upside than what's been discussed to date in terms of it's this open pit that can now go underground. It's another thing that we target that provides a lot of optionality around these types of assets. And so, congratulations to the Black Cat team in terms of being able to figure out a way to productively bring this into production. And Vox and our shareholders are very big beneficiaries of that.
Yeah, Kyle, it's interesting. We did talk last time about the strength of Western Australia and just Australia in general as a jurisdiction for mining, but we talk about this on the show quite often with different guests that for some reason it just seems like Canadian companies and even US companies develop projects with an idea to market them to majors or with an idea to put their hand up and say, hey, somebody take me over. Where the Australian business model is, hey, we're looking at this project through the lens of not marketing, but how do we develop and build this thing? And there just seems like there's a lot more projects in Australia that actually get built and into production and grow organically. And that seems to be the case here. I guess speaking of the strength of your Western Australian asset base, you put out a news release just this week and you were talking about a couple key assets. One of them we've discussed before, and that is the Red Hill project that Northern Star is developing, where you bought a basket of royalties, and this is one that you feel like you got exceedingly good accretive value on for the future. And the other one in here is Evolution Mining. They have both the Castle Hill and the Kunanaling. I can't pronounce it.
Kind of knowing, yeah. The Aussies have eccentric names to their royalties and their land tenure. So yeah, kind of knowing. Well, yeah, I'm always excited to talk about Red Hill. I think it is very, very much overlooked within our portfolio for the contribution that we ultimately expect it to have. We've stated that we believe that it can be approximately $10 million per annum in royalty revs to us, which makes this a top 20 development stage gold royalty globally, if not a top 10 gold royalty globally. These are very rare to find. It's a function of it being also a 4% gross revenue royalty, uncapped. But this is also representative of Australia and how Western Australia is just stronger in a lot of ways than what we find in North America. This is essentially an asset that's being unlocked because of the strong infrastructure that Northern Star has in Western Australia and their Fimiston KCGM operations, where they're putting $1.5 billion into expanding that mill and therefore availing itself to this really fantastic potential ore feed from Red Hill, which was a previously producing asset. This is a brownfields discovery on it. But these royalties are very unique within small cap royalty companies. There are not many small cap royalty cos that have a royalty, a gold royalty that can do circa $10 million per annum in royalty revenues, and certainly not many that are on this type of near-term path, relatively near-term path to production. So I think it's an element of our business. It's a real strength, is this Red Hill royalty. I don't think the market is fully valuing it, far from it at this point. But I do believe that, ultimately our portfolio of royalties, the exposure that we have to Western Australia is really unique within our segment. And that exposure will ultimately realize in a premium valuation around our portfolio and our business. So we're excited about Red Hill. You touched on kind of knowing, look, it's right down the middle for Vox. We're just, we continue to be consistent around what we say we're going to do. We bought a package of near-term production royalties from a private party in Australia, and they're operated by Evolution. Evolution's continued to guide to the Castle Hill and Cunnahnulling projects being in production in 2026. And so it was an opportunity for us to buy near-term production at good value. And Cunnahnulling is really kind of the jewel on the top of the crown that we wanted this portfolio for, because it's an uncapped net smelter returns royalty and very, very prospective geology for mine life extension there, and ultimately what will be a royalty package that we believe to return a very nice multiple on invested capital to Vox and our shareholders. So, again, Chad, it can sound boring. It's just very consistent for us. We have a business model that we believe is going to create excess returns with much lower risk for our investors, and we continue to be disciplined around that.
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic transaction in the space that maybe was underappreciated by not just analysts and generalist investors that are looking at these different royalty companies and comparing them, but also just people that are in the royalty space and investing in it. I don't think a lot of people appreciate how significant both Red Hill and then the overall Mungari project, which is Castle Hill and Cunnahnulling together. Both of those are just true gems that you're going to have in their portfolio. And in the end, truth will out, as they say. And I think people will see just how accretive those transactions were. I guess just wrap us up with how you're valued in the marketplace compared to other royalty companies. You've got a couple slides in your deck that talk about what the price to NAV valuation you're getting versus other companies. And obviously the senior companies get a premium to the junior and mid-tier companies, but just, you have some room for a re-rating here, I think. And I think also you're very big as a company on the return on invested capital, like what you actually invest and what you get back. I really think separates you from other companies. So maybe to speak to your position within the royalty space.
Yeah. And look, Shad, you and I were talking about it kind of off air for a minute. There is general skepticism around royalty companies and their fundamental ability to create value for shareholders. And, it's a big focus for us. Management owns 11% of this business. I'm about 7% of it. We are every day looking at how we can create the maximum long-term value for our shareholder group. We would do it anyway if we weren't as vested as we are, but certainly I think investors can appreciate the alignment that we have in terms of generating the ultimate most positive outcome that we can. And a part of that is really focusing on the operating leverage of the firm and lowering the cost profile to where we can, while maintaining the efficiencies and the productivity of the firm. And I'm really pleased to say that I think we've done a very good job of that. And to the investors that are skeptical of the royalty sector, I hope they would take a look at Vox and see what we're doing. We're working for them. We're working hard for them. And we believe that we are, look, there's a lot of options in the royalty world in terms of what horse you're going to ride and what team, you're going to trust with your capital. And, I hope a lot of investors would put us on the radar screen, and we're going to continue to do our best to showcase that we can actually go create fundamental value for them, and that we can showcase operating leverage within the firm and continue to grow the business truly accretively, both from a cash flow perspective and net asset value perspective, as we have to date, which I think has really led the industry in a lot of respects. But in terms of how we're valued presently, I think that's one of the big opportunities for our current investors and new investors to see ultimately get reflected, is that we trade at a discount to NAV. The majors trade at big premiums to NAV. The big three being Wheaton, Franco, and Royal, consistently trade between 1.9 times NAV and maybe even up to 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 times NAV at the high end, depending on, where we're at in the markets. I'm not suggesting that our business is going to get there. I think there are other juniors that are trading in that range. I think that our portfolio could ultimately showcase itself to be worth that type of multiple. But look, I do think there's a lot of room between where we're at, which is at, probably a 30 or 40% discount to NAV, to something trading at a nice premium to NAV. And I think our portfolio is what's going to drive that, the continued development as we go from 7 producing assets to ultimately we believe is going to be, in the proximity of 20, a lot more cash flow, a lot more revenue. And, as I talked about, operating leverage within that to where there's continues to be a surplus of capital to invest in new transactions and give back to our shareholders in the form of dividends. So I like the trajectory of our business. We're trying to do it the right way for our shareholders. I hope that the market can appreciate that and see some of the fact patterns that demonstrate that as well. But I really like the way that we're positioned now. I think that ultimately you're going to see us trade at the higher end, if we continue to stay disciplined and consistent around our business model and our execution for shareholders.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there for today, Kyle. But a great summary there of, where there could be a re-rating, not just to get valued at your NAV, but even a premium to NAV, like a lot of the other companies, both senior and junior companies. And you've outlined for us today a couple key projects that are coming down the pipeline, or some that are just come online, that are going to continue to add value and revenue streams to the company moving into the future. And these are long life assets that'll be paying for many, many years to come. And again, if people want to follow along with more of the news or check out the corporate presentation for Vox, definitely click on the link below this interview. It takes you right over to their website. And Kyle, keep us posted as more news comes out. We'll get you back on the show for an update.
Will do. Thanks so much, Chad.